Warren. So again, Warren, and it's very difficult to follow all these fabulous people who've come up here to speak because Warren talks about child development and all the other aspects and attributes of really being good at what kids do and how we engage with them. I think my only claim to fame now, and I appreciate shout out to Tushar, the only brown guy in the room. Thanks, Tushar, for being number 2. And so I'm thinking, what are the things that I can impart here? Because I'll get a little bit into my background. There's only so much that I can say. And so I'm like, well, let's talk about the cute who doesn't fit in, right? And let's talk a little bit about disrupting kids, and I'll explain more about what that is in a second. So as I've done this before, because I do certainly feel like a fish out of water in this place. I don't have a degree in anything that's relevant to talking about this topic, and even in the technology space, I've never written a line of code. That's pretty much the reason that I'm here. And last year, I had the chance to bring my 3 kids with me here. They're 3, 6, and 9 years old, and I've told the story before, so I won't bore the people who've been here before on why it is I decided to go and start to do some of the things that I've done. But just by way of the background, I did start a company called Togetherville. Interestingly enough, we launched, I think, 3 or 4 days after AppCamp last year, and we were acquired by Disney 3 months ago. And so now I work for the Walt Disney Company. Thank you. Very happy to have all the Disney folks in the room because, believe me, I learned so much at this place. I'm happy to have other colleagues at Disney here because I think now we have an amazing opportunity. We'll talk a little bit about that now and some of the stuff you're hearing around technology to really change the value proposition of that company to a larger audience. So I'm excited to participate in that now. Before that, I was a consultant and a lawyer, and then these degrees. So I didn't leave my ego on the beach. It's more to say, look, I don't know crap about what you guys are talking about when it comes to child development. I do know a little bit about this stuff. And so what I want to talk to you about in the notion of disrupting kids is that we've kind of gotten into a pattern, and I want to talk you through my thoughts on the pattern that have developed over just being in this space for the last 4 years. So I left McKinsey 4 years ago to start this company called Togetherville, which builds a social platform for children that tries to take advantage of the most modern interactive technologies that exist today. So, when it comes right down to it, again, room filled of really, really smart people who understand cognitive development, who understand a variety of different aspects of how knowledge is gained. And you can think through time, there's always been this quest for knowledge. It's not something new. But we talk about it like we've been doing it the same way forever. There's all different types of notions of how knowledge has been gained, and they go back, to particular times when actually what mattered is what you needed to know at the time. And so what you needed to know at the time probably had to do with a mentor, right? There was somebody there who was able to teach you, and you needed to know, if you were going to be a craftsman, you needed to know more about that craft. If you were going to be a hunter, you hoped to find somebody who could teach you those things. And that's what education meant. Like, you were good at something because somebody taught you that thing. And it was a very much of a one-to-one or one-to-few type of concept. But through history, learning has been going on. It's just been going on in a very different way than the way it is today. Then we tried to formalize it, right? And so we created these church-centric schools, and the reason that learning needed to happen in the way it was happening is because we needed to perpetuate a doctrine, right? And there was something that somebody needed everybody to know, and so they built schools about it. There was philosophy, there was a discourse around a particular set of things, and that particular set of things was quite compelling to the people at the time, but there was a tremendous power associated with this church-centric notion, and that church-centric notion educated millions and millions of people, tens of millions, billions potentially of people in that same notion. And it's been going on for a very long time, for more than 1,000 years. The first university was started more than 1,000 years ago. And you think back and say, well, what is this classroom you saw at the beginning, and where did that come from? Well, we've kind of moved beyond that now to this notion that college is required. In 1800, there were 143 colleges and universities in the world, 143. In 2010, there were 20,000. Okay. And so we have turned learning into a factory. Learning has been going on throughout history. It's always happened. It's not that people didn't learn before. They learned in very different ways. What was expected of their learning was very different, and how they engaged with their learning was incredibly different. And we end up here today. And so it's really interesting to figure out why. And so one of the things I'll shout out to Jesse, who also quoted Clayton Christensen earlier today, the guy who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma is the same guy who wrote this book. When I left McKinsey, one of the first things that I started to dig deeper into, why is it that I think the stuff that my kids are about to engage with online really sucks, right? I mean, really. And I started to look at it and said it really comes down to a fundamental lack of understanding of how we got here and what it is that we expect from children. This patronizing notion that you should be able to build technology and watch kids do simple little activities because it's fun doesn't really get to the idea of what was there. And disrupting class is a really seminal work which talks about the nature of innovation and disruption, particularly in the notion of schools. And as you can see, I stole my name a little bit from what he talks about in his book. But I'll give you the quick synopsis of it if you haven't had a chance to read it. And he says, this notion of the education system in the U.S., the one that we keep on clamoring for that needs to be changed, comes down to basically about 120 years of history. We talk about it like it's been going on forever and ever and ever. It has not, right? The turn of the century, we had one-room schoolhouses in some places. If you were lucky, you went to a place where there was a teacher who taught everybody who would come. There was no requirement, and that was the way we did things. You know what? That worked for a while, until we needed multi-room schoolhouses, right? And those multi-room schoolhouses basically just broke you down either by age or by capability and still tried to educate you. I'm not talking about ancient history here. This is in the last century, right? For a very long time, up until the time of the World War I and World War II, where we switched to skill-based schools. And that was because of the economy. And there are two major attributes of the economy that required this. One, we needed to fill industrial jobs. The world was rapidly industrializing, and the classical education we were giving kids was not preparing them for the assembly line. That, and parents needed to work. You actually had two parents in many cases working. The husband was off fighting a war, and the mother was off, patronizing gender role, but let's see that's what it was. They were working on factory line. And so you needed a place to leave your kid all day. That was the school. We built the factory to take care of the parents at the factory, right? And that lasted for a really long time. There was very little innovation or disruption that happened after that point in time, right? Until No Child Left Behind, right? And No Child Left Behind, actually, if you read Christensen's book, is interesting. He talks about the four major disruptions in the learning system: one-room schoolhouse, multi-room schoolhouse, skill-based learning, and No Child Left Behind. And the only innovation really of No Child Left Behind was a requirement by the government that everyone's learning must improve. That's it. Before there was no such mandate, right? There was an expectation that everyone was getting better, but there was no real mandate that everyone's education had to improve. Now we're talking about the disruptions in the education system of the U.S. So we keep on talking about how hard it is to make change happen. This is really all we got. And when you think about it, the schools are suffering, right? My kids are 3, 6, and 9. I worry about what they have. This is the first generation that is less literate than their parents. Pretty frightening when you think about what that means. We passed the peak, just like in a lot of other industries. That time has come and that time is gone. So it's really time to think about disrupting the way we engage with kids, right? So whether or not you like it, this movie came out last year, Waiting for Superman, had some very interesting thoughts behind it. Again, in the same role that Christensen is bringing to the table, it's a different way of thinking. And I'll just give you a minute.
You wake up every morning and you know that kids are getting a really crappy education right now.
So you think that most of the kids here are getting a crappy education right now?
Oh, I don't think they are. I know they are.
Either the kids are getting stupider every year, or something is wrong in the education system.
I just try to do my best in school and make my grandmother proud.
Among 30 developed countries, we rank 25th in math and 21st in science. In almost every category, we've fallen behind, except one. Kids from the USA rank number 1 in confidence.
I think about 60,000 people have gone to this school in 40 years. 40,000 didn't graduate. This is the damage that this school has done to this neighborhood.
A child that doesn't finish high school will earn less and be 8 times more likely to go to prison.
I want to go to school.
So obviously the movie goes on, and it really begins to bring at the heart of a really important issue, is that we have spent an unprecedented amount of money on education, and it's past the point of diminishing returns. It's actually gone to the negative. And it's no one's fault, and I feel bad because everyone's still putting their best effort on, right? But at some level in business and in life, you take a look back and you try to figure out what's happening. And this conveyor belt that we created for our children, which is, and preschool, we're going to drop them off here, and then they're going to come out in the end. You know what? It didn't work. Something along the way hasn't actually met the need or desire of those children. And if you watch Waiting for Superman, it's kind of this sad tale. Obviously, it's got politics behind it, and I don't necessarily need to get one aspect of the politics. But what's sad is that the kids really want to learn, right? The kids really want that opportunity, and quite frankly, it's our responsibility to give it to them. That's kind of the job that we have as adults in the society. Now, it's not to give them the education we have. It's to give them the education that is appropriate for their time and their resources. It's the education that's appropriate for today. And this conveyor belt that we think, hey, you know what? Mom and dad both work. We're going to drop our kid off in first grade and then we're going to pick them up in college. Doesn't work because they're all coming back home. Right? I don't know if you saw the stat last week. 85% of college graduates are going home. Home. Right? That whole system we built to get them out, got them back. They're called boomerangs. Okay, 85%. Why? Because there's a fundamental disconnect between the most rapidly growing economy that the world has ever seen. Take a look back thousands of years. There are more job opportunities now than there were then, right? A lot more things you could do. There's a lot of opportunity around. These kids are coming home, right? Because something in the entire system has not worked. And so this notion of disruption that Jesse talked about earlier, that I'm talking about today, really comes down to understanding that, you know what, as sad as it is, sometimes things don't work out. There's a hat factory. Okay? It was a good idea at the time. You can't perpetuate hat factories into perpetuity when globalization happens. Yeah, there were some hats. They weren't made there. They're making a lot of money on eBay too. The thing that we have to realize is just like any other industry, the car industry is, the finance industry, there's disruption that needs to happen. And we've held on to this notion that it's important for us to educate our kids in the same way, and we've got these standards, and they're going to work a particular way, and we're going to make it happen. Well, the infrastructure is crumbling, and unfortunately what's inside that building is our kids, and that's our future, and we need to wake up. Because if we don't think differently about how that engagement needs to happen, something else will happen, right? We're terrified by the computer. When you take it into the classroom, it's one of those things like, I need to find a place for it, it's going to go over there, it doesn't match up with my lesson plan, I'm not really sure how to incorporate it. The amount of confusion that happens when you put that interface in front of an adult who's responsible for teaching that child, it's mind-boggling. Right? And it's mind-boggling not because I'm worried about what their reaction is, but I'm worried about what the opportunity that's missed for children is, because today's tech is fast, right? It is really fast for all of us. And we all have our own challenges. Me at age 40 have a challenge keeping up with that same technology that everybody else has around them. It's personalized. That's frightening too. Wait, you didn't know who I was 5 years ago. Now you know who I am. Now everybody knows who I am. That picture that went out, everyone's got it. It's being tagged. It's personal. It's direct to consumer. There is no intermediary anymore. Any one of you, well, aside from Apple. Okay, any one of you can make an app and try to get it out in front of people, right? Direct to consumer. Those channels opened up. I don't have to worry about retail anymore. I don't have to worry about a publisher. I can make stuff happen in real time. It is low cost, both to build and to own. It didn't cost you more than $10,000, maybe $50,000 to build an app, really good one, and it doesn't cost you more than $1 or $2 to buy it. The devices themselves are coming down in price. Google's going to subsidize Android for everybody. Cost is not the issue anymore. They're connected to each other all the time. Everywhere you go, there's something it's connected to. And they're global. It doesn't stop here. The 2 billion handsets that are being sold in the next year or two aren't being sold here, right? They're all over the world, and that is the place that we've never thought about before. School is local, the world is not. And these standards that we're setting for our kids, for our future, are very much localized. And they're distributed now, right? The rest of the world is distributed. This is the technology of today. It's not a matter of, oh, look, we built a school and people from miles around will come to it. And then they will go off to a university, or people from even greater distances will come. That model changed. It changed a long time ago. And if you can close your eyes for a second, you'll begin to think about, this is channeling my inner Matthew McConaughey, if you guys remember that. Right? So if you just go through at the end of that movie and think about some of the real opportunities, there is a person, and they have at their fingertips access to more information than anybody in the history of the world. And they're not intimidated by it. And they know what to find, and they know where to find it. And they look like that. That person is not scared of anything you put in front of them. That's frightening too, for the reasons that I mentioned, right? But they're not. And They have access to more information than anyone in the history of the world. I left McKinsey to go start Togetherville when I realized that my son, who was 4 years old at the time, had access to more information than anyone who had ever lived just by sitting in front of a computer. That's access. That's not understanding. That's not knowledge. That's not the ability to navigate. That's just access. But you know what? I grew up in rural North Carolina and I didn't have access. And he does. So what are we doing about it? They are not frightened. And if there's going to be a disruption, it's going to be done by her. And what we have to figure out in the notion of disrupting kids is that they are going to disrupt us if we don't find a way to make this happen. And that'll become messier before it becomes better. Now, this is kind of like preaching to the choir. I think everyone here is really enthusiastic about the power of what we're about to do and what we're doing and how we're doing it, but realize the rest of the world doesn't get this. And it is dramatically important that we build high-quality products, that we get them out there with the right message, that we do it the right way, because she deserves it. She deserves the best we have to offer, and right now she doesn't get it. She doesn't get it day in and day out. This industry that we're in doesn't support it financially. The media doesn't understand it. Everyone's frightened in a cloud of fear. But at the end of the day, that's what matters, that that girl has the opportunity to do the things that we also had opportunity to do as children. So let's give our best, and let's not teach kids like they don't know what they're doing.